Sir, this ticket can't be real. 4 words that made an aerospace engineer cancel a $4.8 billion aircraft order. Dr. Marcus Webb didn't look like someone who had revolutionized commercial aviation. At 51 years old, he dressed like a college professor on vacation. Khaki cargo pants, a faded MIT sweatshirt, worn sneakers, and reading glasses perpetually perched on top of his graying hair. He carried a weathered backpack containing his laptop, a tablet loaded with technical drawings, and a dog-eared paperback about fluid dynamics. What he didn't carry was any indication that he was the chief aerospace engineer at Orion Aviation Systems, the man who had designed the Aeroflex 950, the most fuel-efficient wide-body aircraft in commercial aviation history, the plane that was currently revolutionizing long-haul flight, the plane that airlines were fighting each other to purchase, the plane that Marcus was sitting inside right now as a passenger on Constellation Airlines Flight 88 from Seattle to London. Seat 3A, first class, window, his favorite position to observe how his design performed in actual operation. Constellation Airlines had been Marcus's partner for 7 years. They had been the launch customer for the Aeroflex 950, ordering an initial fleet of 8 aircraft with options for 12 more. That order, worth $4.8 billion, had made Constellation CEO look like a visionary. The Aeroflex's efficiency had cut their fuel costs by 22%, allowed them to open new routes that were previously unprofitable, and turned Constellation from a mid-tier carrier into a rising star. Marcus flew Constellation frequently, always in first class, always taking notes on performance, always listening to the engine sounds that other passengers never noticed. He could hear when the thrust was optimized, when the flaps deployed, when the aircraft was operating at peak efficiency. To him, every flight was a performance review of his life's work. Today's flight was supposed to be routine. A quick trip to London for a conference on sustainable aviation, then back home to Seattle. He had checked in online, received his mobile boarding pass, and arrived at the gate with his usual low-key efficiency. The gate agent, a young man named Kevin, had processed his boarding pass with barely a glance. "Thank you, Dr. Webb. Enjoy your flight." Marcus had boarded with the first-class passengers, walking down the jet bridge and into the aircraft he had spent a decade designing. Even after hundreds of flights, he still felt a quiet pride seeing his work come to life. The cabin layout, the overhead bin design, the seat configuration, the lighting system, all of it had passed through his hands at some point in development. He settled into 3A, stowed his backpack in the overhead bin, and pulled out his tablet to review some technical specifications for a presentation he was giving in London. The first-class cabin was about half full. A businessman in 1A was already asleep. 2 women in row 2 were chatting quietly. An older gentleman in 4C was reading the Financial Times. Then Bradley Morrison arrived. Bradley was Constellation's senior purser, a man in his early 40s who had been with the airline for 15 years and treated his authority over the first-class cabin like a military command. He wore his uniform with crisp precision, his name badge polished to a shine, his gray hair styled with the kind of attention that suggested he spent significant time in front of mirrors. He walked through the first-class cabin with a clipboard, checking seat assignments against boarding passes, ensuring everything was in order for departure. When he reached row 3, he stopped. "Excuse me, sir," Bradley said, his voice carrying the tone of someone addressing a problem. "May I see your boarding pass?" Marcus looked up from his tablet. Of course. He pulled out his phone and displayed the digital boarding pass. Seat 3A, Marcus Webb. Constellation Elite Platinum status clearly visible. Bradley stared at the phone screen for a long moment, then looked at Marcus, then back at the screen. His expression shifted through a series of calculations that Marcus recognized immediately. The mental gymnastics of someone trying to reconcile what they were seeing with what they expected to see. "Sir, this ticket can't be real," Bradley said finally. Marcus blinked. Sorry, what?" "This boarding pass, it appears to be falsified. First-class tickets are expensive, and our system has been flagging fraudulent mobile passes. I'm going to need to verify this with the gate. You can check right now with your tablet, Marcus said, gesturing to the device Bradley was holding. My name is Marcus Webb. Frequent flyer number is visible on the pass. It'll take you 30 seconds to verify. Bradley's jaw tightened. Sir, I know how to do my job. Please remain seated. He walked toward the front galley, pulling out his phone. Marcus could see him making a call, speaking in low tones, glancing back toward seat 3A. The other first-class passengers were now openly watching, the atmosphere in the cabin shifting from relaxed anticipation to awkward tension. Marcus sat quietly, tablet still in his hand, a familiar exhaustion settling into his bones. He had experienced variations of this scene throughout his life. The assumption that he didn't belong, the demand for additional verification, the barely concealed suspicion that his credentials must be fraudulent because they didn't match someone's mental image of who should possess them. He was a black man in cargo pants and a college sweatshirt sitting in first class. To Bradley Morrison, this apparently required investigation. 2 minutes passed, 3, 4. Other passengers were boarding now, economy passengers moving through first class toward the back of the aircraft, slowing their pace to observe the drama unfolding in row 3. Finally, Bradley returned, accompanied by another flight attendant, a younger man named Derek who looked uncomfortable with whatever he'd been asked to do. Sir, Bradley said, his voice now carrying a note of vindication, we've been unable to verify your ticket with the gate. They have no record of a Marcus Webb checking in for this flight. I'm going to have to ask you to deplane so we can sort this out. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but he kept his voice calm. That's impossible. Call your system administrator. Call your customer service line. My ticket is valid. Sir, I'm not going to argue with you. If you don't deplane voluntarily, I'll have to call security. The cabin was now completely silent. Every passenger was watching. Marcus could see a teenager in economy holding up a phone, clearly recording. What seems to be the problem? The voice came from behind Bradley. It was Captain Richardson, the flight's commander, a silver-haired man in his late 50s who had just entered the cabin. Captain, we have a passenger with a suspected fraudulent first-class ticket. He's refusing to cooperate with verification procedures. Captain Richardson looked at Marcus, then at Bradley. What seat? 3A, sir. The captain pulled out his own tablet and tapped through several screens. Marcus Webb? Yes, sir, Marcus said. Richardson studied his screen, his expression changing from professional neutrality to confusion, then to something resembling alarm. He looked at Marcus more carefully, then back at his screen, then at Bradley with an expression that could freeze water. Mr. Morrison, may I speak with you privately in the cockpit? Captain, I'm simply following protocol. Now, Mr. Morrison. The tone left no room for argument. Bradley followed the captain toward the cockpit, his confident posture already beginning to crack. Derek, the other flight attendant, stood awkwardly in the aisle, unsure what to do. Marcus returned to his tablet, though he was no longer processing the technical specifications on the screen. He was thinking about the order for 12 additional Aeroflex 950 aircraft. The order that Constellation CEO, Robert Chen, had been negotiating with Orion Aviation for the past 6 months. The order that Marcus had been personally advocating for within his company, arguing that Constellation was a strong partner who understood the value of innovation. The order that was worth $4.8 billion. 3 minutes later, Captain Richardson emerged from the cockpit alone. He walked directly to row 3 and crouched down beside Marcus's seat, his voice quiet but audible to nearby passengers. Dr. Webb, I apologize profoundly for what just happened. There was absolutely no justification for questioning your ticket. Your status and credentials are impeccable. Mr. Morrison has been removed from this flight and will be suspended pending investigation. Marcus looked at the captain. What did your tablet tell you? Richardson hesitated. It told me that you're not just Elite Platinum. You're listed in our system as a VIP stakeholder. And when I called the operations center to verify, they informed me that you're the chief engineer who designed this aircraft. The nearby passengers who could hear this gasped quietly. The businessman in 1A sat up straighter. The teenager in economy was definitely still recording. He didn't know, Marcus said simply. He looked at me and made an assumption. I understand, and it's inexcusable. Dr. Webb, is there anything I can do to make this right? Marcus thought about the question. He thought about the years of work that had gone into the Aeroflex 950. The sleepless nights, the failed prototypes, the breakthroughs that had come at 3 a.m. when everyone else had given up. He thought about the partnership with Constellation, the trust that had been built, the belief that this airline valued innovation and excellence. And he thought about Bradley Morrison, who had looked at him and decided that a black man in casual clothes couldn't possibly belong in first class, regardless of what the ticket said. "Captain Richardson," Marcus said quietly, "I'm going to get off this aircraft now. Not because Mr. Morrison was right, but because I need to make a phone call. Dr. Webb, please, you don't need to leave. Your seat is absolutely yours. We're delaying departure to address this situation properly."
I appreciate that, but I need to call my CEO, and I need to call Robert Chin at Constellation. And I think those conversations will go better if I'm not sitting inside an aircraft that's trying to depart. The captain's face went pale. He understood exactly what those calls would be about. Marcus gathered his backpack, stood up, and walked toward the exit. As he passed through the aircraft, passengers watched in silence. The teenager with the phone was still recording. Someone else was typing frantically on their laptop. Marcus walked up the jet bridge and back into the terminal, finding a quiet corner near a window overlooking the tarmac. He could see Flight 88, his Aeroflex 950, sitting at the gate. Beautiful, efficient, revolutionary. And about to lose Constellation Airlines as a customer. He pulled out his phone and made the first call. "Orion Aviation, Dr. Webb's office." "Sarah, it's Marcus. I need you to connect me with Richard immediately." "Dr. Webb, I thought you were on a flight to London." "Change of plans. Get me Richard now. Tell him it's urgent regarding the Constellation order." Richard Zhao, CEO of Orion Aviation Systems, answered his phone on the second ring. He had been in a meeting with the company's board of directors, reviewing quarterly projections, when his assistant Sarah had interrupted with the kind of urgency that meant something significant had happened. "Marcus, what's wrong? Sarah said it's about Constellation." "Richard, I need you to pull up the contract for the additional 12 Aeroflex aircraft, the $4.8 billion order we've been negotiating with Constellation." "I'm looking at it now. Marcus, where are you? I thought you were flying to London for the Sustainability Conference." "I'm at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. I just got off a Constellation flight." "Richard, I need you to cancel the order. All 12 aircraft, immediately." There was absolute silence on the other end of the line. Then carefully, "Marcus, that's our largest pending contract. It represents 30% of our projected revenue for the next 3 years. Can you tell me what happened?" Marcus took a breath and recounted the incident with Bradley Morrison. The question ticket, the accusation of fraud, the demand that he deplane, the assumption, visible in every word and gesture, that a black man in casual clothes couldn't possibly belong in first class on an aircraft he had designed. When he finished, Richard was quiet for a long moment. "Marcus, I don't even know what to say. This is unconscionable. But canceling a $4.8 billion order? That affects our entire company, our shareholders, our employees. Are you absolutely certain?" "Richard, let me ask you something. What's the core value of Orion Aviation? What's the principle we've built this company on?" "Excellence in engineering. Innovation with integrity."
Exactly. Integrity. And what does it say about our integrity if we partner with an airline whose culture allows a senior crew member to profile a passenger, question his credentials without justification, and threaten him with security because he didn't look like what they expected a first-class passenger to look like? Marcus, this was one employee, one bad interaction. Was it? Or was it a symptom of a culture? Richard, I've flown Constellation dozens of times. I've watched how they treat passengers, how their crew makes decisions about who deserves accommodation and who deserves scrutiny. Today was just the first time it happened to me directly, but I guarantee you it's not the first time it's happened on their flights. Richard sighed. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to call Robert Chin. Tell him we're withdrawing from negotiations for the additional aircraft order. Cite concerns about organizational culture inconsistent with Orion's values. Make it clear this isn't about money or contract terms, it's about principles. Marcus, Chen is going to ask why. He's going to want specifics. Then give him specifics. Tell him that his senior purser questioned my ticket, accused me of fraud, and tried to have me removed from a flight on an aircraft I designed because he didn't believe a black man in casual clothes could afford first class. Tell him I was treated like a criminal in my own design. And tell him that I personally can no longer advocate for a partnership with an airline that tolerates that behavior. This is going to crater their stock. They've been advertising the Aeroflex expansion as a cornerstone of their growth strategy. Investors have priced that into their valuation. That's not my concern, Richard. My concern is that we build partnerships with organizations that share our values. Constellation has demonstrated they don't. Richard was silent for a moment, then said quietly, "Marcus, in 15 years of working with you, I've never heard you this resolved about anything. You're absolutely certain?" "I've never been more certain. Make the call." "All right, I'll call Chen now." "Marcus, I'm sorry this happened to you. I'm sorry it happens to anyone." "Make the call, Richard." Marcus ended the conversation and immediately dialed another number. This call was more personal. "Marcus Webb's phone. This is unusual. You never call during work hours." The voice belonged to his wife, Dr. Patricia Webb, a sociology professor at the University of Washington who specialized in institutional discrimination. "Patricia, I need to tell you what just happened before you hear it on the news." He recounted the incident again, and Patricia listened in silence. When he finished, she said simply, "Are you okay? I'm tired, Pat. I'm so tired of this. I'm 51 years old. I've built a career, earned respect, revolutionized an industry, and I still get treated like I'm trying to steal a seat I didn't pay for. What are you going to do?" "I just told Richard to cancel the Constellation order. All 12 aircraft, $4.8 billion. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Good." "Good?" "Marcus, you've spent your entire career teaching our children that excellence and integrity matter more than convenience or profit. This is you living that principle. It's going to be expensive, it's going to be complicated, but it's right, and I'm proud of you." Marcus felt his eyes sting slightly. "It's going to be a media circus." "Then let it be a circus. Maybe it needs to be. Maybe other people need to see that this still happens, even to someone with your credentials and success. Maybe other airlines need to understand that discrimination has consequences. I love you. I love you too. Come home. We'll deal with whatever happens together." Marcus ended the call and sat in the quiet corner of the terminal, watching aircraft take off and land through the massive windows. Each plane was a marvel of engineering, a testament to human ingenuity and collaboration. And each one carried hundreds of people who deserved to be treated with dignity, regardless of how they looked or what assumptions others made about them. His phone buzzed. A text from Richard. "Called Chen. He's in shock, demanding to speak with you directly. Send him to voicemail. Our legal team is drafting termination notice now. Should be sent within the hour. Marcus, the board supports this decision. Whatever happens, we're with you." Another buzz. This one from Sarah. "Dr. Webb, reporters are already calling. Bloomberg, Reuters, Aviation Week. They're asking about Constellation order cancellation. What should I tell them?" Marcus typed back, "No comment at this time. All inquiries to Orion PR department." Within 30 minutes, Marcus's phone was overwhelmed with notifications, news alerts, social media mentions. The story was already breaking. Orion Aviation cancels $4.8 billion Constellation order, reason unknown. Then the real story started to emerge. The teenager on Flight 88 had posted his video to social media. The footage showed Bradley Morrison confronting Marcus, questioning his ticket, threatening him with security. The caption read, "Constellation Airlines purser accused black passenger of having fake first-class ticket. Turns out the passenger designed the plane. Update, Orion just canceled $4.8 billion aircraft order." The video went viral within minutes. thousands of shares, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. The comment sections filled with outrage, with people sharing their own stories of being profiled on flights, with aviation professionals expressing shock that this had happened to Marcus Webb of all people. By the time Marcus's phone rang with a call from Robert Chen, Constellation CEO, the airline stock had already dropped 12%. Marcus considered not answering, but he wanted Chen to hear directly from him why this had happened.
Dr. Webb, this is Robert Chen. I need to understand what's happening. Richard Zhao just informed me that Orion is withdrawing from our expansion order. He mentioned an incident on one of our flights but wouldn't provide details. I need to know what occurred. Mr. Chen, one of your senior pursers accused me of having a fraudulent first-class ticket, demanded ID plane, and threatened me with security on an aircraft I designed, while sitting in a seat I legitimately purchased, because he didn't believe someone who looks like me could belong in first class. Chen was silent for a long moment. Dr. Webb, I don't know what to say. This is absolutely unacceptable. The crew member will be terminated immediately. We'll issue a formal apology. We'll provide compensation for Mr. Chan. I don't want compensation. I want you to understand what this incident reveals about Constellation's culture. Your purser felt empowered to question my credentials without any justification. He made an assumption based on my appearance and acted on that assumption despite clear evidence to the contrary. That suggests a systemic problem, not just one bad employee. Dr. Webb, with respect, this was an isolated incident by one individual. It doesn't represent our company values or our culture. Then how did it happen? How did someone with 15 years at your airline reach the position of senior purser while holding biases so strong that he questioned a passenger's ticket solely based on appearance? How did your training, your supervision, your culture fail to prevent this? Chen didn't have an answer. Mr. Chen, I've been flying your airline for 7 years. I've seen how your crews interact with passengers. I've watched how decisions get made about who receives extra attention and who receives extra scrutiny. Today was just the first time I was on the receiving end of that scrutiny, but I guarantee you I'm not the first passenger to experience it. What do you want from us, Dr. Webb? Nothing. I've already made my decision. Orion will not be supplying the additional aircraft. That order is canceled. I personally cannot advocate for a partnership with an airline whose culture tolerates discrimination. That decision will cost us billions in market value. It will affect thousands of our employees. It will damage relationships we've built over years. Yes, it will. And that's the consequence of allowing discrimination to persist in your organization. Mr. Chen, I don't say this with anger or vindictiveness. I say it with clarity. Your airline chose to question my right to sit in a seat I designed on a plane I created for a route I helped make profitable. You made that choice through your culture, your training, and your tolerance of bias. Now you live with the consequences. Dr. Webb, please, let me fly to Seattle. Let me meet with you in person. Let's find a way to make this right. There's nothing to make right for me personally. What you need to make right is your culture. And that's work you need to do regardless of whether Orion does business with you. Goodbye, Mr. Chen. Marcus ended the call and turned off his phone. He needed peace. He needed to think, but the world wasn't giving him peace. As he sat in the terminal, airport staff began recognizing him. Some approached with expressions of support, others with questions. One pilot from a different airline shook his hand and said simply, "Thank you." This needed to happen. An hour later, Marcus received a call on his wife's phone. She had called him after his own phone went dark. It was Richard again. Marcus, you need to see what's happening. Constellation stock is down 28%. Their board is in emergency session. Robert Chen just announced his intention to resign. The FAA is launching an investigation into discriminatory practices. And Marcus, 6 other airlines have reached out asking about Aeroflex availability. They want the aircraft Constellation just lost. Marcus closed his eyes. Richard, I didn't do this to damage Constellation. I did it because I couldn't continue a partnership with them after what happened. I know,
But sometimes principled decisions have ripple effects you can't control. The aviation industry is watching. They're seeing that discrimination has real consequences, expensive consequences, and they're recalibrating. Over the next 48 hours, the story dominated aviation news and spilled over into mainstream media. The video from Flight 88 had been viewed over 10 million times. Civil rights organizations issued statements praising Marcus's decision. Business schools began discussing it as a case study in corporate ethics. Other passengers came forward with their own stories of discrimination on Constellation flights, creating a pattern that the airline could no longer dismiss as isolated incidents. Constellation's market capitalization dropped by 40%. Advertisers pulled sponsorships. Corporate customers moved their contracts to other airlines. The damage was catastrophic and spreading. Bradley Morrison, the purser who had questioned Marcus's ticket, became the face of airline discrimination. He was terminated, banned from aviation work, and found himself unemployable in the industry he had served for 15 years. In interviews, he claimed he was just following protocol and didn't mean anything by it. But the video evidence and the context made clear what had actually happened. He had profiled a passenger and acted on that bias. Marcus didn't watch the news coverage. He didn't read the articles. He spent the 48 hours after the incident at home with his wife and their 2 children, a son in medical school and a daughter finishing her PhD in mechanical engineering. They talked about discrimination, about consequences, about the cost of principles. "Dad," his daughter Maya asked over dinner, "do you regret it, costing yourself that contract?" Marcus thought about the question carefully. "Maya, I regret that it was necessary. I regret that we live in a world where someone with my credentials and experience can still be profiled and questioned based on appearance. I regret that Bradley Morrison felt empowered to do what he did. But do I regret my response? No. Because the alternative was to accept disrespect and continue funding it with my partnership. And I couldn't do that." His son David nodded slowly. "You taught us that dignity isn't negotiable, that excellence demands respect. You're living those lessons." "I'm trying. It's expensive. But some things are worth more than money." On the 3rd day after the incident, Marcus received a call from an unexpected source. Captain Richardson, the pilot from Flight 88. "Dr. Webb, I hope you don't mind we calling. I got your number from the airline's VIP registry before all this happened. I wanted you to know something." "What's that, Captain?" "After you left Flight 88, I spoke to the passengers, everyone who witnessed what happened with Bradley Morrison. I told them who you were, what you designed, what you represented. And then I told them that what happened to you was inexcusable, and that if any of them experienced or witnessed similar discrimination on any flight, they should document it and report it." "That's good, Captain. Thank you. That's not why I'm calling. I'm calling to tell you that I resigned from Constellation yesterday. I've been flying for 30 years, and I always told myself I was just doing my job, that I couldn't control the culture, that I wasn't responsible for how passengers were treated as long as I flew the plane safely. But watching what happened to you, seeing how Bradley acted and how the system allowed it, I realized I was complicit. By staying silent, by just flying the plane and ignoring the culture, I was part of the problem." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Where will you go?" "I've had offers from 3 airlines in the past 2 days. Everyone's watching what happened. Everyone's recalibrating their culture. I'm going to work for someone who actually means it when they say discrimination won't be tolerated. And Dr. Webb, I wanted to say I'm sorry. Sorry I didn't see the culture I was part of. Sorry it took something this dramatic to wake me up. Captain Richardson, you weren't the problem on that flight. You responded appropriately once you understood what was happening. Maybe, but I should have understood sooner. We all should have." After the call ended, Marcus sat on his back porch overlooking Lake Washington, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. His phone, back on now, continued to buzz with notifications, interview requests, speaking invitations, messages of support from colleagues around the world. But one message stood out. It was from a young black aerospace engineer named Jordan, someone Marcus had mentored years ago. "Dr. Webb, I just want to say thank you. I've experienced what you experienced, being questioned, being doubted, having my credentials challenged because I didn't look like what people expected an engineer to look like. I always thought I just had to accept it, that fighting back would cost me opportunities. But you showed me that sometimes fighting back is the only way to create change. You showed me that dignity has value that can be measured, that consequences are real, that principles matter more than profit. Thank you for teaching me that lesson. Thank you for being what I needed to see." Marcus read the message 3 times. Then he typed a response. "Jordan, the lesson isn't just that fighting back is possible. The lesson is that systems only change when the people with power decide that injustice is more expensive than justice. I had power, technical expertise, industry respect, financial leverage. I used that power to enforce a consequence. But here's what I need you to understand. You have power too. Maybe not the same kind of power I have, but power nonetheless. The power to document discrimination, the power to speak up, the power to walk away from organizations that don't respect you, the power to demand better. Don't wait until you have my credentials to stand up for yourself. Stand up now, every time. Because that's how cultures change, one person at a time, deciding that disrespect has a cost." He sent the message and put his phone down. Tomorrow, he would fly to London on a different airline for his conference. Next week, he would return to work at Orion, where they would begin negotiations with new airline partners who understood that excellence deserved respect. Next month, he would testify before the FAA about discrimination in aviation and how to prevent it. But tonight, he sat with his family, grateful for their support, proud of the stand he had taken, and hopeful that maybe, just maybe, this expensive lesson would make the industry better for everyone who came after him. Patricia came out to the porch and sat beside him, taking his hand. "Regrets?" she asked softly. "None," he said. "Absolutely none." 6 months after Flight 88, the commercial aviation industry had been fundamentally transformed. The incident that began with 4 words, "Sir, this ticket can't be real," had triggered a cascade of changes that reached every corner of the sector. Constellation Airlines no longer existed as an independent entity. The financial hemorrhaging that began the day Marcus Webb walked off their aircraft never stopped. Within 2 weeks, their stock had lost 53% of its value. Within a month, 3 of their major corporate accounts had moved to competitors. Within 3 months, they were forced into a merger with a larger carrier at a fraction of their former valuation. The Constellation name was retired. Their distinctive blue and silver livery was painted over. The airline that had once been a rising star became a cautionary tale. Robert Chin, their former CEO, had resigned the week after the incident and never worked in aviation again. In his resignation letter, leaked to the press, he wrote, "I built a company that prioritized growth over culture, efficiency over equity, and profit over principles. The consequence of those choices was losing the partnership of the very person whose innovation made our growth possible. I failed as a leader, and I take full responsibility for that failure." Bradley Morrison, the purser who had questioned Marcus's ticket, faced consequences that extended far beyond termination. He became the symbol of airline discrimination, his face appearing in training materials across the industry as an example of implicit bias in action. He tried to sue Constellation for wrongful termination, arguing he had simply been following protocol. The lawsuit was dismissed when investigators discovered 17 other incidents over his 15-year career where he had questioned or challenged passengers of color in ways he never questioned white passengers. The pattern was undeniable. In a desperate attempt at redemption, Bradley agreed to be interviewed for a documentary about discrimination in aviation. During that interview, sitting in his living room, unemployed and unemployable, he broke down.
"I didn't think I was racist," he said, his voice cracking. "I never used slurs. I never consciously discriminated.
But I realize now that I made assumptions every single day about who belonged in first class and who didn't. I looked at passengers and made instant judgments based on their appearance, their clothing, their race, and I acted on those judgments. I thought I was protecting the premium experience for legitimate passengers. But what I was really doing was enforcing my own biases. The interviewer asked, "Do you understand what you cost Dr. Webb that day?" I cost him his dignity. I cost him the peace of simply traveling without being questioned. I cost him the basic respect every human being deserves. And through my actions, I cost my entire airline billions of dollars and thousands of people their jobs. All because I couldn't see past my own assumptions. What would you say to Dr. Webb if he were here? Bradley looked directly at the camera. I would say, "I'm sorry." I would say I was wrong. And I would say that I hope the industry learns from my failure so that what I did to him never happens to anyone else. Marcus never watched that interview. He didn't need Bradley's apology. What he needed was systemic change. And in the 6 months since Flight 88, he had been working tirelessly to create it. The FAA investigation that Marcus's incident triggered revealed patterns of discrimination across multiple airlines. Auditors analyzed millions of customer complaints, boarding pass disputes, and security incidents. The data was damning. Passengers of color were 3 times more likely to have their tickets questioned, 4 times more likely to be asked to change seats, and 7 times more likely to be removed from flights for disruptive behavior that white passengers engaged in without consequence. The FAA issued new regulations requiring airlines to implement comprehensive anti-discrimination training, establish independent oversight committees to review passenger complaints, and publicly report demographic data on passenger treatment incidents. Airlines that failed to comply faced massive fines and potential loss of operating certificates. But Marcus didn't stop with regulatory change. He used his platform and his expertise to push for cultural transformation throughout the industry. He gave a keynote address at the International Aviation Summit in Dubai, speaking to an audience of 3,000 airline executives, engineers, and policymakers. The speech became legendary in aviation circles. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, standing on a stage overlooking the massive conference hall, "I'm going to tell you about the most expensive ticket verification in aviation history. It cost one airline $4.8 billion. It cost thousands of employees their jobs. It cost a CEO his career. And it cost the industry its complacency about discrimination." He clicked to a slide showing the Aeroflex 950, the aircraft he had designed. "This is my life's work. 10 years of development, thousands of hours in wind tunnels, computer simulations, and test flights. The most fuel-efficient wide-body aircraft in commercial aviation. I designed every system, optimized every component, and poured my soul into making this aircraft revolutionary." Another click, a photo of seat 3A from the interior of the Aeroflex. "This is where I was sitting when a purser decided my first-class ticket couldn't be real. Not because there was anything wrong with the ticket, not because I was behaving inappropriately, but because when he looked at me, a black man in casual clothes, he made an assumption about who I was and what I could afford." The audience was absolutely silent. Here's what that purser didn't know. I wasn't just a passenger. I was the designer of the aircraft. I was the reason his airline was profitable. I was the partner his company desperately needed for future growth. But even if I hadn't been any of those things, even if I had been exactly what he assumed, a regular passenger who happened to be black and dressed casually, I still deserved respect. I still deserved to sit in the seat I paid for without having my credentials questioned. He paused, letting the words sink in. The aviation industry has a discrimination problem. It's not unique to one airline. It's not caused by a few bad employees. It's systemic. It's cultural. It's the result of decades of unconscious bias being tolerated, accommodated, and institutionalized. And it's expensive. Click, a graph showing Constellation stock decline. This is what discrimination costs. Billions in shareholder value, thousands of jobs, entire companies. And this is just the financial cost. The human cost? The dignity stripped, the humiliation experienced, the message sent to millions of passengers that they don't belong, that cost is incalculable. He looked across the audience, making eye contact with CEOs and decision makers. I have a challenge for every airline represented here today. Go back to your companies and audit your culture. Pull your complaint data. Analyze your passenger removal incidents. Look at who gets questioned and who doesn't. Look at who gets accommodated and who gets scrutinized. Look at the patterns. And if you find what I suspect you'll find, that passengers of color, passengers with disabilities, passengers who don't fit your mental image of premium customers are treated differently, then fix it. Not with a memo, not with a training video, but with systemic, cultural, accountability-driven change. Because here's what I learned from Flight 88. Customers have power. Partners have power. Engineers have power. Investors have power. And we will use that power to walk away from organizations that don't respect basic human dignity. The era of tolerating discrimination because addressing it is uncomfortable, that era is over. The speech received a 10-minute standing ovation. Within weeks, 17 major airlines announced comprehensive reviews of their customer service practices and new anti-discrimination initiatives. But Marcus's most important work happened in smaller, quieter spaces. He started a mentorship program for young engineers of color, knowing that representation in aerospace leadership was the long-term solution to bias in the industry. Every month, he met with a dozen students, sharing not just technical knowledge, but also the reality of navigating professional spaces where you were often the only person who looked like you. You will face moments like I faced on Flight 88, he told them during one session. Moments where someone questions your credentials, doubts your expertise, assumes you don't belong. In those moments, remember, their assumption is their failure, not yours. Your worth is not determined by their recognition. Your excellence speaks for itself. And if they can't see it, that's their limitation, not your problem. A young woman named Amara, a brilliant aerodynamics student from Nigeria, raised her hand. Dr. Webb, what if we don't have your resources? What if we can't afford to walk away from opportunities when we're disrespected? Marcus nodded. That's the hardest part. I had the privilege of financial security and professional reputation that allowed me to enforce consequences. Not everyone has that privilege. But here's what everyone does have: documentation, voice, networks. When you experience discrimination, document it, write it down, record it if legal, tell someone, build a record. Because systems don't change from one dramatic incident. They change from accumulated evidence that the problem is real and pervasive. And, he continued, support each other. When you see a colleague being discriminated against, speak up. Be the witness. Be the advocate. Use whatever power you do have, even if it's just a power to say, I saw what happened and it was wrong, to create accountability. The mentorship program grew. Within a year, it had 500 participants across 20 countries. Major aerospace companies began funding it, recognizing that building a diverse pipeline of engineering talent required addressing the barriers that Marcus had faced throughout his career. Marcus also worked directly with airlines to redesign their training programs. He consulted with Meridian Airways, one of the carriers that had picked up the Aeroflex orders that Constellation lost, helping them create what became known as the Webb Protocol, a comprehensive system for preventing discrimination in customer service. The protocol included several key elements. First, mandatory scenario-based training where crew members practiced handling passenger interactions without relying on appearance-based assumptions. Every scenario was recorded and reviewed, with facilitators pointing out moments where bias influenced decisions. Second, blind verification systems where ticket disputes were resolved through systematic checks rather than crew judgment. If a passenger's ticket was questioned, the crew member had to verify it through the airline system without reference to the passenger's appearance or behavior. Only the boarding pass data mattered. Third, demographic auditing, where airlines tracked who was questioned, who was moved, who was removed, broken down by race, age, gender, and other factors. If patterns emerged, and they always did initially, airlines were required to investigate and address the root causes. Fourth, passenger advisory boards that included diverse travelers who could provide feedback on their experiences and identify problems that leadership might miss.
Fifth, and perhaps most importantly, accountability systems where crew members who engaged in discriminatory behavior faced real consequences, and managers who failed to address discrimination lost their positions. The web protocol became an industry standard within 18 months. Airlines that adopted it saw dramatic reductions in discrimination complaints, improvements in customer satisfaction across all demographic groups, and, perhaps surprisingly to some, increases in employee morale. It turned out that creating a culture of respect benefited everyone, not just those who had been previously marginalized. Marcus also collaborated with aircraft manufacturers to think about how design itself could reduce bias. He worked on cabin layouts that didn't create such stark visual hierarchies between classes. He advocated for boarding procedures that didn't parade economy passengers through first class, eliminating the opportunity for comparison and judgment. He pushed for technology solutions like biometric boarding and digital seat assignments that reduced human discretion and therefore human bias. Not everyone appreciated his work. He received criticism from those who thought he was overreacting, that one incident didn't justify such sweeping changes, that he was imposing political correctness on an industry that should focus on efficiency and profit. Marcus's response was always measured but firm. If you think ensuring that all passengers are treated with dignity regardless of race is political correctness, then you've revealed more about your values than mine. The changes I'm advocating aren't radical, they're basic. They're about making the aviation industry live up to the principles it already claims to hold. 1 year after Flight 88, Marcus was invited back to Seattle-Tacoma Airport for a ceremony. The airport authority was dedicating a new training center for aviation professionals, and they wanted to name it after him. Marcus was reluctant. "I didn't do anything heroic," he told the airport director. "I just refused to accept disrespect." "Dr. Webb," the director replied, "that's exactly why we're naming it after you. You showed the industry that refusing to accept disrespect, enforcing consequences for discrimination, is possible and necessary. You changed how we think about culture and accountability in aviation. That deserves recognition." The Marcus Webb Center for Excellence in Aviation opened with a ceremony attended by hundreds of industry professionals, former Constellation employees who had found new jobs with better cultures, and 36 students from Marcus's internship program. During his speech at the dedication, Marcus looked out at the crowd and saw faces of every race, age, and background. He saw the future of aviation, diverse, talented, and committed to principles that went beyond profit. "This center isn't about me," Marcus said. "It's about the millions of passengers who have experienced what I experienced. The passengers who were questioned, doubted, moved, removed, or discriminated against simply because they didn't look like someone's mental image of who belongs in a premium cabin or a cockpit or an executive suite. It's about the crew members who witnessed discrimination and stayed silent because they didn't know how to intervene or feared retaliation. It's about the executives who knew there were problems but found it easier to issue statements than to change cultures. And most importantly, it's about the next generation, the young people who are entering this industry and deserve to work in environments where excellence is recognized regardless of appearance, where credentials are respected regardless of race, and where dignity is non-negotiable regardless of ticket class. Flight 88 cost me a 3-hour delay and the temporary discomfort of being questioned. It cost Bradley Morrison his career. It cost Constellation Airlines its future.
But if it results in even one fewer passenger being discriminated against, one fewer crew member feeling empowered to profile, one fewer company tolerating bias, then the cost was worth it. After the ceremony, a young black boy, perhaps 10 years old, approached Marcus with his father. The boy was wearing an airline pilot costume, complete with captain's hat and toy wings. "Dr. Webb," the father said, "my son wants to be a pilot when he grows up. After what happened to you, he was scared that people wouldn't believe he could do it. But watching how you responded, standing up for yourself, changing the industry, he's not scared anymore. He wanted to meet you." Marcus crouched down to the boy's level. "What's your name?" "Christopher," the boy said quietly. "Christopher, let me tell you something important. People are going to doubt you. They're going to make assumptions about what you can and can't do based on how you look. But here's the truth. Their assumptions don't determine your capabilities. Your work does, your preparation does, your excellence does. And when someone treats you unfairly, you have choices. You can accept it, or you can challenge it. You can stay silent, or you can speak up. You can walk away from places that don't respect you, knowing that better opportunities exist." "Will it be hard?" Christopher asked. "Yes, it will be hard. But here's what I learned. Hard doesn't mean impossible. And standing up for yourself, demanding the respect you deserve, that makes you stronger, not weaker. Can you remember that?" Christopher nodded solemnly. "Good. Now, when you become a pilot, and notice I said when, not if, I want you to fly every passenger with the respect and dignity they deserve. I want you to be the kind of pilot who makes everyone feel safe and valued. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." "Then I can't wait to fly on your aircraft someday, Captain Christopher." The boy beamed, and his father shook Marcus's hand with tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "You don't know what this means." But Marcus did know. He knew exactly what it meant to have someone believe in your potential when the world questioned it. He knew what it meant to see someone who looked like you succeeding in spaces you'd been told you didn't belong. He knew what it meant to have role models who showed that dignity and success could coexist. That evening, Marcus returned home to find his family gathered for dinner. His wife Patricia had made his favorite meal. His daughter Maya had flown home from her PhD program. His son David had driven down from medical school. They wanted to celebrate the one-year anniversary of the incident, as it had become known in their family. "Dad," Maya said as they sat around the table, "I have something to tell you. I got the Aerospace Engineering Fellowship at MIT, full funding for my doctoral research. They specifically mentioned that they want more diversity in their program, and they said your advocacy work was part of what made them prioritize it." Marcus felt his chest tighten with pride. "That's incredible, Maya. I'm so proud of you." "I'm proud of you too, Dad. You showed me that being an engineer isn't just about designing things. It's about having the integrity to stand up for what's right, even when it's expensive." David added, "I had a similar experience in medical school. One of my professors asked me to give a presentation about discrimination in healthcare. I talked about your experience and connected it to how patients of color are treated differently in medical settings. The professor said it was the most important presentation of the semester." Patricia raised her glass. "To Marcus, who taught our children and thousands of others that dignity is not negotiable and that consequences for injustice are not optional." They clinked glasses, and Marcus looked around the table at his family, the people who had supported him through the hardest decision of his professional life, who had stood by him when he walked away from billions, who had never once questioned whether he had done the right thing. "I didn't do this alone," Marcus said quietly. "I had the privilege of resources, the platform of reputation, and the support of people who believe that principles matter more than profit. Not everyone has those advantages. But I hope that by using the advantages I had, I made it a little easier for the next person. For Christopher, the kid who wants to be a pilot. For Jordan, the young engineer who needs to see that standing up is possible. For every passenger who will board a flight tomorrow and be treated with the dignity they deserve because airlines are finally being held accountable." "That's your legacy, Marcus," Patricia said. not the aircraft you designed, as remarkable as they are. Your legacy is the culture you helped change, the industry you helped transform, the message you sent that discrimination, no matter how polite, how subtle, how normalized, will not be tolerated. 2 years after Flight 88, Marcus received an unexpected letter. It was from Bradley Morrison, the purser who had questioned his ticket. Marcus almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity won out.
Dr. Webb, the letter began, I don't expect you to read this, and I certainly don't expect you to forgive me. But I needed to write it anyway, for my own understanding if nothing else. I've spent the past 2 years in therapy, working through the biases I didn't even know I had. I've read everything I could find about implicit bias, systemic racism, and discrimination. I've watched the video of our interaction dozens of times, seeing myself through others' eyes, understanding how my assumptions and actions were rooted in prejudices I'd never examined. I destroyed my career. I destroyed an airline. I caused pain to you and thousands of others. And I did it all while believing I was just doing my job, just maintaining standards, just protecting the premium experience. I was wrong, profoundly, inexcusably wrong. I'm writing to tell you that I've spent the past year volunteering with a nonprofit that trains customer service workers to recognize and interrupt bias. I can never undo what I did to you, but I can try to prevent others from making the same mistakes. I can be a cautionary tale. I can be the example of what not to do. I don't expect anything from you. Not forgiveness, not acknowledgement, not absolution. I just wanted you to know that your response to my actions, walking away, enforcing consequences, demanding accountability, it changed me. It made me finally see what I had refused to see my entire career. I'm sorry for what I did, for what I represented, for what I cost you and so many others. Bradley Morrison. Marcus read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. He never responded. Some apologies didn't require acceptance. Some lessons had to be learned through consequence, not absolution. But he was glad to know that even Bradley Morrison, the face of discrimination in aviation, had the capacity to change. Because if someone as entrenched in bias as Bradley could evolve, then maybe the industry could too. 5 years after Flight 88, Marcus Webb retired from Orion Aviation. He had spent 30 years revolutionizing aircraft design, and he was ready for a new challenge. He became a full-time advocate and educator, teaching at universities, consulting with airlines, speaking at conferences, and mentoring the next generation of aerospace professionals. The Aeroflex 950 continued to dominate the long-haul market, flying for a dozen airlines across 6 continents. Every time one of those aircraft took off, carrying hundreds of passengers toward their destinations, it carried with it the principle that Marcus had fought for, that excellence deserves respect, that dignity is non-negotiable, and that discrimination, no matter how normalized, will always have consequences. And somewhere, in airports around the world, passengers boarded flights without being questioned, without being doubted, without being profiled. They sat in seats they had paid for and were treated with the respect every human being deserves. Most of them never knew about Flight 88, about the black man who had designed the aircraft beneath them, about the 4 words that had changed an industry. But the change was real. The culture was different. The consequences had worked. And Marcus Webb, sitting in whatever seat he chose, on whatever airline respected excellence regardless of appearance, finally traveled in peace.